And so when we pick them up, kids go home, his friends go home. He goes, Mom, I felt like a dad. And he's like, it's great that they all wanted to come fishing, but like one kid, he kept trying to tie his own line, but his lures kept falling off. So I had to do it for him. He goes, one kid kept getting his like fishing line stuck in the trees and the bushes. Another one was complaining because he couldn't catch fish, but he never had his line in the water. He's like, so I barely even got to fish.
Childhood isn't broken, but it is being reprogrammed. This is The Slow Scroll, a conversation about kids, tech, and the slow work of growing up in a world built for instant everything. We're not here to romanticize the past or panic about the future. We're here to think harder about what kids need, what adults missed, and how schools can be a place to get it right. Each episode is a chance to untangle the messy intersection of tech, identity, learning, and growth with curiosity, honesty, and a deep respect for what childhood can still be. We are back to discuss part 3 of The Anxious Generation, which covers chapters 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8. So we're going to start off just with our overall thoughts on chapter 5, which was titled The 4 Foundational Harms: Social Deprivation, Sleep Deprivation, Attention Fragmentation, and Addiction. So, Debbie and Vanessa, what did you think of chapter 5?
Overall, I feel like, well, sleep deprivation is my kind of, everything goes back to that. Have we gotten enough sleep? But yeah, no, I feel like these gave names to some of the things that you already know, So this, to me, none of this was a big shock. But I felt like it kind of broke it down and gave names to some of these things that we know both from being in the classroom and as parents, like what we've seen. My favorite, and we can get to it towards the end of the chapter when we're talking about it, but it is this loop that he talks about on page 131, and how like they intentionally use this loop that touches on these addictions for social media design. So yeah, Vanessa, what did you think?
Super interesting. And I'm glad that you called us back to that. Yeah, I think I'm kind of at the same place, Debbie, where observing my own patterns, observing, kind of my kiddos' use, and then thinking about things that we're seeing in the classroom. It did just kind of give name and help me contextualize kind of where those challenges are.
Yeah. I'm with you. It's funny as I'm looking at my notes, and the first 2 things on my notes are 2 things that we actually talked about before we started recording: maximum spread in extremism, and then safetyism, which I'm sure will come up. And then right after that, sleep. It does. I think I literally wrote, kids need sleep. This is not shocking. And a variable ratio schedule that stuck out to me. I mean, it's the example that he opens up with his daughter, which the self-awareness on a 6-year-old, whether this is a true story or not, I don't know. As a parent of a current 6-year-old, what my son's not going to say is, hey, daddy, can you please take X away from me because it's drawing my attention? That seems, I'll go with it. I've got no reason to doubt the story, but that's an incredible awareness on a 6-year-old. But then he specifically name checks a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. And so that stuck out to me because my wife is a behaviorist. And so I hear her talking about these types of things as she talks about like therapy for students with autism. And we just finished potty training finished. He's still sleeping in a diaper, but we haven't had any accidents for a while. Potty training our 2-year-old. And we used a variable ratio schedule on him to help reinforce, like sitting on the toilet and, not peeing in your pants and that type of stuff. So that was interesting that stuck out to me because I don't think I've ever thought about social media as being a variable ratio schedule, but it absolutely fits that definition, which then goes to the reason I was like, oh, those are the things we talked about, because that's that loop, right, on page 1 was it 151? Man, long chapter. 131, where it's that trigger action reward investment. So yeah.
So he jumps in and starts talking about the arrival of the phone-based childhood. And on page 115, I did write, I don't know how this is going to go over, but I did write the word capitalism on the top of the page because he starts talking about it really shocked me. And I do remember I had a roommate in college who was trying to explain apps and how those were going to become this next big thing. And we made fun of him. We were like, you're such a nerd. And reading this and talking about how in July 2008, there were 500 apps available up to, by 2013, there was over 1 million. I mean, just thinking about that, it blew up. It went crazy. And
Do you remember the commercial?
I
There's
don't
an app
know.
for that?
You tell me. Oh,
Can you imagine that running now? There's an app for that. Yeah, we know. Everybody
Yeah.
knows. Everybody
know.
knows, right? There's an app for
I
that. There's an
know.
app for that. But that was the thing. That was the draw,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think if anything, we have app fatigue. But yeah, but he talks about, I underline this. He says, it's, this then became the competition to create the most engaging app, right? And so this is what made smartphones and these third party companies created this competition, which then fueled this influx of apps, right? And so I think that to me, it feels a little ominous, I think, when you think about how we're talking about, a phone-based childhood, and then you immediately start talking about all these companies and how fast it grew and how this competition to capture our child's attention, to me, this is where the bulk of the responsibility lies when it comes to how are we going to address this. But we can talk more about that later. But yeah, that to me was bam right off the bat, because I do feel like I remember from 2008 to 2000 or from, what was it? Yeah, 2008 to 2013. I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Well, and I think it's just looking again at 115, he's talking about the pricing of apps, like is someone going to pay $2.99 for an app if a competitor has it for free, which to your point drives like if you're not getting revenue from your users, then you're getting revenue from ad sales, which then makes your users the product of your app. But companies publicly traded companies have a fiscal responsibility to their shareholders to maximize their profit. And then just down below that, the people with the least willpower and the greatest vulnerability to manipulation were, of course, children and adolescents whose frontal cortex wasn't fully developed, right? Mm-hmm. So, here's your target audience. You have this responsibility as a company to make as much money as you can, and it's very easy to see the kind of drip feed into how that got to where we are.
My kids have asked me to pay for things. Actually, here's an interesting story, and I don't know how it's going to end, but my son, going into summer, and we did get a letter from his school encouraging them to play Prodigy and sending home the login. And so his new thing is, can I get my daily turn? And I think there is like a daily streak situation happening in there, because the first thing he does is go and opens a daily gift or something. So there's because his new thing, it used to be, can I play Prodigy? Now it's, can I get my daily turn? But he's been asking if I would get him the membership, because right now they just play the free version. And at first I said, no, I'm not going to pay for that. I think it was, I don't remember how much it was a month, but it felt more expensive than what I wanted to pay. And he kept saying, well, his new thing was, well, I will pay for it. And, I'll pay for it. Can I pay for it? We use my money for it. And so finally I was just trying to stall the conversation. So I said, maybe we'll talk about it for the summer.
Classic parenting move.
I know. I'm not ready to talk about that yet. That's usually what I say. You need an answer right now. The answer is no. If you can wait, maybe you'll get a maybe. I'm always, yeah. But so it's come up a few more times. It's almost summer. And so I do think I'm going to let him use his money, which means he'll give me cash and I'll use my card. I explained that to him. I said, well, here's how they get you. They want it to be reoccurring. So we sort of have an agreement. My worry is that it's going to turn into, well, I paid for it, I can play it whenever I want, which is not the answer, which is not true. It will be, you can still have your allotted time, which can be revoked if, but like he's going to have more access. I think because his reason for wanting it has all to do with the incentives that come on with it. So, yeah. So I don't know. I think I'm going to let him use his own money to get the membership for the month of July, maybe August. We'll see how it goes, but
Mm.
we'll cancel it. It will be a short-term thing. And then he'll just have to go back to being a peon in Prodigy.
Yeah, well, and Debbie, I'm curious. So, like, I know when my oldest was young, um, I was thoughtful about like TV screen time, and trying to be intentional in engaging him in other ways that were not screen based. But I feel like kind of that time period. So my son was born in 2011. So really kind of the start of this. And just interesting because, then iPad, tablet, all of that stuff kind of came to be more and more popular, as did smartphones. So I started to see that more, even out of the grocery store, or you're waiting in a doctor's office. Here's something that you give to your child. And I remember thinking like, I don't know if I want that for mine, but I don't know that I was necessarily then thinking about like my own use with a smart device and how it was taking attention away. So I'm curious, like, did you have similar thoughts or concerns with your kiddos that are close in age to mine?
Of course. And I mean, some of what you're talking about makes me think we'll talk about this probably in our next episode, but some of this collective action or, you know what I mean? Like looking around. So we'll talk more about that next time. But yes, of course. And I think that's a pretty natural thing that our youngers get earlier exposure when they have older siblings. There's no way around it. I mean, yeah. I mean, we still try, like on the big things, yes, we hold our ground. But yeah, on some of those littler things, you're just like, yeah, not the best. But um, I think that's something that's pretty real. But like I said, we do talk about our brains, and there's some chapters in here where I'm thinking, okay, I think maybe part of our contract might be that my kids have to read some of these chapters or whatever's current when we get closer to when they'll be wanting cell phones, but they might have to read some of this stuff before, and we might have to talk about it before they can get their own device, and I just think that's where a lot of this is. So yeah, so the same son. It's not my oldest son who wants to pay for the app. It's my younger son who's doing this. I blame the schools for introducing Prodigy. No, I'm just joking. But well, and that is really interesting because yeah, and I don't really know where I stand on it, but it talks about this too, because he talks about social media's transformations and the invention of the like button and the retweet, and how they are using this psychology to hook people. And that is something we know in education. That's the whole idea behind gamification, is that there's a strategy there, and we can hook kids and help them tap into learning, maybe without them even realizing it. And so that's interesting, because I think same with that loop. It's yes, there is a way there, and that's good to know about child psychology so that we can harness that to help them. But I think what we're seeing is that that's not what's happening. Instead, it's being harnessed in ways that aren't helping. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of dichotomy of like the school's responsibility and role in this, and then the company's responsibility and role in this.
Yeah. I found these four harms really interesting. I cards on the table. I know I've said it before, but I have a tendency to get a little defensive when people start talking about addiction when it comes to screen usage. And I think what kind of sold me on this book is he's not talking about looking at a screen being addicting. And that's so often the narrative is, you know, what does screen time look like, and like how are you using it? What is it doing? The social deprivation piece, right? I really, really liked this section. I mean, or it's a little terrifying, but we have a tendency to say we're more connected than ever. We are more connected than ever, and he makes this distinction between quantity and quality. Yeah, you are
Mm-hmm.
more connected to your peers. You can reach more stuff, but is like opportunity cost. What are you losing in that sense? And I underlined on page 122 because this is my biggest pet peeve, and I try really hard not to do this. But I found myself doing it with teachers when I was an instructional coach in the building. He says we like when our phone like bugs us or there's an update or something. He says we usually don't tell the other person to stop talking. We just pull out our phone and spend time pecking at it. And I can think of specific times where I was in a school district, a teacher is asking me a question, and then I would pull out my phone to like answer their question right away. I'm like looking something up for them, or I'm trying to find a solution to their problem. And it took me a couple of months to realize that's not actually what matters in this situation. Like immediacy is important in terms of like relationships for sure. But what this person wanted to do was connect with me. They could have sent me an email if they wanted an answer really fast, but they stopped me in the hall because for whatever reason they wanted to talk to Stefan. And then when I pull out my phone to solve their problem, I'm putting a barrier in between us, and so like that in a professional
Mm-hmm.
sense is not great, but there is nothing that bugs me more when I'm having a conversation with someone and it feels like they're not invested in it. It's like I'm
Yep.
giving
Mm-hmm.
you my attention, put your freaking phone away.
Yep. Well, and
Did
I think
you? Oh, sorry, Debbie. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think two things on that. One, the modeling, I think, and I have caught myself doing this as well. When my kids are trying to get my attention, what am I doing? Am I half listening, staring at my phone, or do I put it down and look at them? So that's something that I've even given them permission to, which sometimes is embarrassing, but yeah, to like let me know. But then this other part that they talk about on that same page about how it doesn't even, if it's just visible, how it automatically declines the quality and intimacy just by being visible. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is something that can't be like, I just think that this is something that is so important and it has such a bigger impact than we think. And if you think about when do you have your phone, like you sit down for a meeting, your phone is right there. You know what I mean? Kids coming into class and their phone is right there. We've always known this, but knowing that this is kind of this piece about just how it's such a distraction, just being visible and present, I think that one hit me pretty hard. And I do this at home, but it's getting me thinking about like other spaces of, like just having that away in a different space where you don't just reach for it. And harm number two, sleep deprivation. This is I just on page 125, kind of that last paragraph of that section. I just have like a big yes, all capitals, exclamation point. Just because not only as a parent, but as a teacher too, when you would have kids say like, oh, I was up till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, playing video games or being on their phone, you see it. You see what that does to their ability to learn. And I just, I think there's, yeah, so many people that don't realize how important like sleep scheduling is, even through teenage years.
I want to jump in a little bit and explore or kind of think through some of that. So, the analogy about like your brain on drugs. My undergrad is in psychology. I would never claim to be an expert because I feel like even a bachelor's, you're really just getting a lot of that like foundational knowledge. But it has made sense to me because I know like just a little bit about dopamine and how that works and how technology can kind of flood that. But um, on page 133, there's a kind of a quote here. So it says the teenage brain is usually about 80% mature. The remaining 20% rests in the frontal cortex. Um, at this time, teens are highly dependent on their temporal lobe, where emotions, memory, learning, and the reward system reign supreme. So then I got to think about like the frontal or prefrontal cortex is a lot of where our like executive functioning
Mm-hmm.
happens. So then, if we're thinking about the ability to moderate and like if
Mm-hmm.
their brains are not developed in those areas and they have this easily accessible access, I think that that becomes like a really tricky thing. So yes, we can model, but I think to your point, Debbie, like I think as parents and teachers in, academic settings, removing that temptation is also part of that equation because for a lot of kids in this age range, um, they just haven't developed that part of their brain yet. And they're not aware that they haven't developed it. So that can be tricky. Well, and if we think too about neurodivergence, which, that can cover multiple challenges, but I think what we keep hearing, what we keep hearing from educators is that oftentimes like behaviors, especially like post-pandemic, have really become challenging. So then, if we're thinking about dopamine and the prefrontal cortex not quite being developed, the access to smartphones, but then we've also seen a rise in neurodivergence. Now, what causes that? Are there accurate diagnoses? All of those things, I think there's a lot to dig into. Um, but I'm specifically thinking about like students or kids with ADHD and like part of their challenge is also around those executive functionings. So it's almost like a double whammy between, having access to a device and that temptation, these reward systems being built into whatever the technology is. And then, you have things at like a physiological or psychological place that are also making it more challenging. So then these teachers in the classroom, are trying to manage all of it. So earlier, Stefan, you had mentioned something. I can't remember if it was before we started to record or while we were recording, but not having devices in the classroom. As much as it pains me to say that, because I feel like I've kind of seen that whole continuum and we're like, no, you just have to embrace cell phones and, they're going to be a part of the students' lives and, we have to teach them to use it in moderation. And yet, like just the presence of it being there is the temptation. So we are seeing a shift, or at least I am, for districts in my region in the no cell phone policy or having some sort of place to hold those while they're in class.
Well, the big shift in my thinking that, because I was with you, like they're going to have them, need to learn to work with them was, I'm sure I've told you this before, but a friend and colleague of mine, Tyler, once said there's nothing that a teacher can do that's going to be more interesting than what's happening on a kid's phone. He didn't say engaging, he said more interesting. And I just think that is categorically true. If you're trying to compete with a kid's social life in the classroom, you're going to lose. It's there's nothing more important to them. And I would argue the same as for adults. Towards the end of the book, he says, why does this disproportionately impact people like under 30? And I think because by the time it was pretty prolific in our lives, our brains had started to develop more. But that doesn't mean it doesn't impact adults. Adults are just as
Absolutely.
bad,
Absolutely.
and it's frustrating and annoying because we have a tendency to think well, we're adults. Like we have exceptions to kind of like Debbie with your son. And that terrified me a little bit when you said, I'm afraid I'm going to get the argument that, well, it's my money, so I should be able to do with it what I want. And like, that's the most dangerous argument a kid can make because you're like, I see where you're coming from. And at some point, do I just have to put the foot down and say, who's the parent here? Which is
Yes.
just, oh, so
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we were at our little festival in town this weekend, and I wasn't there when the kids left and they showed up with their wallets. And we had that conversation at one point where like we had to step in and say, no more spending your own money. And in the midst of but why is the wise, I think I actually said to my kids, I'm helping you develop financial literacy. And
Oh, I would have paid some money to be there for that
we have no,
moment.
yeah. And it's like, then this is what you get for having parents as teachers,
Yep.
right? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, no. And I don't mind having that battle. And I think this is all part of that helping them learn self-regulation. And I will say the iPad did go away for a while because there was some sneaking and getting on it, and people weren't asking. And so it did go away for a little bit. And then that does help. Now we understand that, oh, I have to ask. Even if it's just sitting out, I still have to ask. And so, you know, I'm not trying to say no, never. I'm trying to say, let's learn regulation. And so it's not going to change the amount of quote unquote what his daily time limit is. It's just what he'll be able to access. And hopefully he sees it's a waste of money. And
There you go.
we'll go
And
from there.
that only comes through guided reflection, right? And that's the other thing. Like kids sneaking the iPad and doing things without asking and like arguing. That's their job. They're supposed to do
Mm-hmm.
that. And no matter what we do with them in terms of like we're going through the same kind of thing with Micah, like my oldest on a much smaller scale because he's got his allowance and there was a neighborhood garage sale over the weekend, so we watched the different places and we told him, you can purchase something, but like the kid doesn't know the value of money yet, and so he's like, can I get this? Can I get this? Can I get this? And he found this little board game, and we bought that with his money and made him hand it over. But we're very intentional about when he gets the money and when it gets given away, that he's a part of that experience. But no matter how often we do those things, he's still not quite grasping it. And it makes me think, you guys are familiar with the works of John Hattie, the meta-analysis?
Mm-hmm.
The thing he says, it has the number one impact from a student's end. Like the number one thing on a teacher's end is collective efficacy. That's pretty commonly known. For a student, the number one thing that's going to impact their growth and development. Do you know what he says? Or what he
Right.
says all the other analyses have said, it's maturity. It's, are they developmentally ready? And there's nothing we can do about that. Sometimes things just click for kids because they matured. And so there is this element of like through proper guidance and structure and reflection, we hope that someday they just get it because they're ready to get it.
But
Well, and
okay,
I'll come back. I'll come back at the end of the summer. I'll add to the Canvas discussion and give an update on how this all turned out. I might come back and say that was a horrible idea and I should have been the adult from the beginning. Or maybe we'll learn some valuable lessons. Stay tuned.
before we transition, I just wanted to comment on what you said there, Stefan. So like we can't force students and like at a certain point, like they just have to reach that level of maturity. But I think what they talk about in this book and like the concern is that because kids in this age group having access to technology, like that normal maturity cycle is
Mm.
like changed or delayed. Um, and like, are they, are kids having the same opportunities to practice emotional regulation or opportunities to try things out, to fail, but like develop that sense of autonomy? And I feel like what I've heard you and Debbie say is like, you guys are very intentional, like as a family, or as parents in having these conversations, um, which is fantastic. But it also makes me think like this is why it needs to be a larger conversation, is because not everybody is talking about these at home. Um, and I don't want to add one more thing that we're asking teachers to do. But if it's not happening at home, and we are giving them access to devices in the classroom, like they're, we have to figure out some way to start these difficult conversations and be more intentional.
And I think we'll grapple with that next episode, right? Like, what can parents and teachers do in the classrooms? Because I'm with you. You don't want to add another thing to a teacher's plate. I would argue it is one of the things we ask teachers to do. Social emotional learning, right? That is one of those things that is expected to take place in the classroom. We have social emotional learning standards in the state of Washington, but that takes time and intentionality, and that's
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. There's a learning curve to that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then to bring us kind of full circle, harm 3, attention fragmentation, harm 4, addiction. These are things that I don't think we need to spend a ton of time digging into because we've already touched on this in previous episodes. On on page 128, I just wrote "ha" in my notes for it because he wrote it may interfere with their maturing ability to focus, and we already have touched on this, right, as far as the attention and what you were just talking about with what you can compete with in the classroom, and what are we setting our teachers up for. The addiction piece, I think that this goes back to the way it's being designed and the fact that they actually want, I mean, on page 130, he talks about how they have these IT and psychology courses that are churning out these developers. And so I think that is why when we talk about this loop cycle on 131, I mean, this is serious stuff. And I've said this already, but I really just think that this comes back to self-regulation, right? And on page 135, he's talking about just the smartphone. He's quoting somebody saying how the smartphone is the modern day hypodermic needle, and how what's different between this socialization is that they have it 24 hours a day, and how in the past, right, we didn't have these faulty, right, or these kind of, you know, um, alternative connections, these digital connections that are with us everywhere, and how that's just too much. So while I don't want to say it's all bad, because he does touches on some of these positives and benefits, and somebody who does live in a rural area, and I taught, and some of my marginalized students really did find their communities online. And it really did get them through tough times to be able to have a place that they could turn to. So I don't want to say it's all bad, but I underlined and starred on the bottom of 137 where um, there is still this loneliness and sense of isolation that is increasing. So while there is benefits and good that may come from it, we still can't just blindly hand these things to our young people and expect them to learn self-regulation on their own, especially when it's not being modeled. Like, adults aren't any better, but our young people are not even close to being set up for this. So, yeah, I feel like in general, this chapter really does just sort of tell us things we already know around kind of what we're doing. So then jumping into chapters 6 and 7, they really do go into kind of more specifics with girls and boys. So what did you guys think about this? Like, kind of what jumped out to you as far as, how this is impacting our young people?
Well, how about you two sit there and listen to me tell you about how social media impacts girls? As a man and a father of two boys.
So you're not gonna take the lead on that one, huh?
I think I'm gonna do a little bit of listening.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, go ahead, Vanessa.
well, I was just gonna say, I think I have more in chapter 7 to talk about that, but I did have a lot of questions just kind of around like stereotypes and gender norms kind of as a whole and wonderings, I guess, about like is the is the author taking in these other perspectives like into account as he's framing chapter 6 and chapter 7?
What do you mean by that?
Um, so I think there's like certain instances where he talks specifically about like um harms to girls in particular and like aspects that kind of or maybe not aspects, characteristics that girls possess that make social media in particular more harmful to them. And then in chapter 7, he talks a little bit about um, like male mental health and like uh, movement away from like the physical working environments and like how that plays a role and is kind of the decline in mental health for boys has been over a longer span of time than it has for girls. So it just left me with a lot of like, and I'm pondering a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, as you're wondering about him, he's kind of painting with a broad brush. Is that what you're
Yes.
thinking? Okay,
Yes.
yeah. And I think, yeah, by definition, I'll speak to kind of the boy side of it. So skipping over into chapter 7 for a sec. The I remember second or third year teaching. This is why I love seventh grade. They'll just say anything. This kid, unprovoked, comes up to me and says, "My dad thinks it's weird that you're my teacher." I said, "Why, man?" And he said, you see, you know where I'm going with this. He says, "Teaching is for women." And I was like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
teaching is for girls,
Mm-hmm.
probably." I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Oh." I think I said, well, it takes a strong man to like deal with someone like you, like joking around, right? And that was it. That was, but I was like, that is interesting. Like that's very much a, um, and he name checks it in here, like in education. He's got some numbers, which I didn't write down off the top of my head here, but he's got some numbers about like the percentage of men versus women in education. And it's something I don't think about a whole ton anymore, but it's something I was definitely aware of my first couple of years in the profession, where I was one of three men in a school of 45 teachers. I was and so that was middle school, right? I'm sure it'd be even less if I was in an elementary school. I've never worked for a none of my evaluators or superiors have ever been men. I've always been evaluated and just managed by a woman. And so it's something I don't think about a whole ton, but like on a broad scale statistically, when you're thinking about education, it is much more of a female dominated world. And it does check out to me that um well, here I say this all the time. I could never do primary. Man, I watch what those primary teachers do and I would lose my ever loving mind. And I think part of that is because it is so much more nurturing. Not that I didn't care for and care about my seventh graders, but my relationship with them would not work in a kinder first, second. I think my cutoff would probably be about third. The way I play with and interact with my kids versus the way my wife does. And we don't fall into super traditional gender norms. We were just talking the other day about how like we both kind of just do everything. And that's what makes our marriage work is we hand off very, very easily. And neither one of us have an issue with um like taking care of being alone with the kids and just being a fully present parent. Every now and then one of us will be like, I need a break. I'm leaving. Like that
Mm-hmm.
happens for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people asked Anna when we adopted our boys, both of them, 4 or 5 years apart, whatever, if I was going to change diapers?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is so
Mm-hmm.
freaking offensive to me as a parent. Like, and I get it. We were talking a little bit earlier before we started recording about how saying something inflammatory, and this is an opinion. This is an opinion that I think plenty of people culturally and society will disagree with me. But like that, I'm sorry, I'm this boy's dad, and I will do whatever he needs. For him.
Yeah.
But the reason she was asked that in the year 2022 when we adopted our youngest was because she has friends whose husbands just did not do that. We're not around for that infant stage. Not that they weren't around, but
Mm-hmm.
weren't that kind of involved. And that was fine. That was just, that's the way they worked. And so I respect that other people have those differences. But when you think about like some of those traditional, like as he talks about some of those very broad strokes comparisons and descriptions of genders, as much as we, I think, I guess I don't know where you two stand on this, but so I'll speak to myself. As much as I would like to think that we're moving a little bit more towards a world that is truly egalitarian and everyone's kind of doing everything, and we're not falling into those traditional gender norms so much, that is still very much a reality and worth noting when it comes to the kids that we're serving. Because just because I expect all those things to happen in my household, and you better believe I will be raising my boys to not be held up by those things, doesn't mean the kids in my classroom are not in households where like that kid who said, my dad thinks it's weird you're a teacher. Do you think he grew up to become a teacher? Doubt it. Would he have made a good one? Yeah. That kid had the heart for it,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it can be, is he taking into account those things? Maybe, maybe not, but he is painting with a broad brush, I think, to make a point.
I feel like what he's tapping into here are larger. I mean, these aren't issues because of social media. These are being aggravated, and social media is tapping into some of these issues, and that's what's exacerbating the problem. But I'm dealing with some of this, like it starts in third grade, is the first year I'm seeing some of this weird girl behavior around friendships, in groups, out groups, the way that they choose who gets to be in and who gets to be out. So these are interesting things that we're seeing kind of in real time. And I will also venture to say that it's not new. Like this is something, I mean, I remember being young and just watching, the social dynamics of my sister and myself. And these are things that have been around for a very long time. And so this is good. Throughout this chapter, I wrote stats, because I feel like this is good. Again, this is giving us some kind of data to support what we've already known. I think it's nice. And for people to go get more information, I think it's nice how he goes into details about how this is affecting girls and boys. To me, it's the fact that it is. And that's enough. Our kids are being harmed. Let's do something about it. Let's not just wait around. And so while I read these chapters and I have lots of notes, I did write weird on page 162 and 164 where he was talking about these phenomenon
I love
where
Debbie's copy of the book where she just has these random
Yes.
words.
Me too. Me too.
Weird.
I know
Ah.
it does. It was. He's talking about the sociogenic epidemics and the one where there was the one where they would get like sick, but then there was the dancing plagues
Yeah.
where They couldn't stop. They would dance until they danced themselves into exhaustion. And so that was something that
Weird.
kind of was, I just think this is a weird study. I'd never heard of this one before. And then he talked about how through TikTok and people seeing things, it was talking like Tourette's, different examples of Tourette's that people
Right.
self-diagnose and then have. So very interesting. But again, I don't think that's your everyday average scenario that people are getting these crazy, whatever you want to call them. I just think that what we know is that this, it may be differently, maybe it's affecting boys and girls differently, but the fact is that it is affecting them. And I think um, magnifying some of these other issues that are at play within our society, right? So, talking about like, oh, these issues that plague the reason it's affecting girls is because it's tapping into these insecurities. Well, why do they have these insecurities? Well, that's probably a different podcast of why we
Right.
should get into that. That's probably not for today. But, that's kind of what I guess I mean. Like, this is just exacerbating societal issues that we already have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's like it's not like anything these things it's not like these things are new. It's that they've just been injected with steroids, and it's made them go faster and farther. And the thing is we also have like now there's a camera everywhere, and so like we see them. And I also think sometimes we fall into the trap of uh I think about this moment all the time. Do you guys watch Game of Thrones?
No,
Yeah.
I'm a
Well,
loser, so
did I?
no.
Is what you meant to ask is, did I read all the books and then watch the series? Yes,
There we
Stefan,
go.
I
All the
did.
books so far. Gotta go find George
Right.
R. R.
I know.
Martin.
They did have to go rogue. HBO did have to fill in
Yeah.
finish some storylines.
Well, you hadn't seen Black Mirror, so I figured I'd ask. I listened to
Fair.
this
That's fair.
podcast that was like the number one podcast during like Game of Thrones heyday, like season like 4, 5, 6. They were getting like they just blew up astronomical download numbers, and which was nuts because they're these two guys, just kind of small independent stuff, and they just got a ton of popularity, and they'd get feedback and they go through it, and they would say this thing every now and then, which is what you have to remember are the people who are like posting on like Reddit or social media about these discussion forums or listen to this podcast are the 1% of the 1% of watchers of this show. It's like, because it was 100 million people or whatever watched it at its peak and they were getting like 1 million downloads or something, like if that, for like this podcast. And it makes me think it's that filter bubble. It's that media literacy piece, right? Like we have a tendency to, like if we're surrounded by something, we think it's happening everywhere. Debbie, you said something that was that I have taken with me and just like kind of internalized when we did that presentation together for those students in our bordering region school district. You had said, well, the thing about the filter bubble is the danger is like you think like that's the only opinion, and so like if you're constantly seeing the same thing, well that's so it's this echo chamber piece. But what you said that hadn't occurred to me was, and the dangerous part is you have a tendency to start thinking everybody else thinks that way also. And as that had never occurred to me that like this is the only way to be thinking, and so like other people might are also going to think this, and then when they don't, there's this cognitive dissonance there that our brain starts to, and it really tells you what kind of person you are, how you respond to that. Makes me think of this also, right? How much of this, and I don't have the actual answer to this, but how much of this is from people who are just like kind of chronically online? If you're reading discussion forums or seeing social media posts, is that a majority of people? Is that like a large slice, or is that a yeah, I'm just wondering what the percentage of people affected by this. I think it's touched everybody in some way, but those people with those super extreme examples, like it's in here, and I meant to bring it up last episode, and I forgot. So now that since it's specifically name checked, internet gaming disorder, we're going to talk about video games for just a second. It like the picture that we have a tendency to paint of kids who are just like playing video games all day, every day, and stuck in the basement with no sunlight. I think that's just such a small slice. And I think it was interesting that he opened up that section on how it is a little bit different because there are some advantages like social aspects and stuff to playing game. Just last night, a friend who I hadn't talked to in a while, I was texting him and we played video games together for like an hour and a half after everybody else in my family went to bed, you know, and that's a great way for me to connect. Shout out to Brian, who's never gonna listen to this. Brian, you suck. But the like that's great, right? Like that was we got to reconnect, we got to talk, we got to do something together, and you know it was 90 minutes after I'd done a bunch of my stuff. Now I'm also an adult with some inhibitions or with some what's the word I'm looking for? With some self-control and restraint, and I had taken care of other stuff already that day, right? And so I have that balance in there. But like when I was younger, would I have played video games for hours on end? And when I say younger, I mean like early 20s, you know, or like in the high school or like college with my friends. Yes, and we would, and it was amazing, right? But I've turned out to be a relatively well-balanced person, you know, because it was less about the game and more about the social environment around it, you know. And so to your point, Debbie, I think what you said about like what we need to take away from this is that it is impacting them. It is impacting boys and girls in different ways, sure. And how it's doing it doesn't matter as much, I think, about why adolescents, teens, boys, girls are engaged in this type of stuff. Because what are they trying to substitute? You know, like if you're spending hours and hours and hours of your time gaming, that's not healthy. What are you looking for? Because it's probably not about the game. For some, maybe it is, but it's probably about social connection. And if you're looking for social connection in an online environment, playing with faceless other people, then that's not healthy, right? What is it that
Yeah.
go touch grass, right? Get outside, go do something. That's not a video game, but it doesn't mean that playing games is bad. It doesn't mean that being, connecting with your
Right.
friends, it's what are you searching for, and then how do you find that in the real world?
Well, and I think what you're describing too is something I touched on earlier is this idea of self-regulation, right? And you are giving me a beautiful segue to kind of take this one out and transition into the next section if we're ready for that. But the two descriptions you just gave is the difference between digital like nutrition and digital junk. And where you are engaging in a conversation, you are building connection. This is somebody you know in the real world who you happen to be enjoying a digital activity together, but there was an endpoint and you left feeling fulfilled and connected to that person versus
Meh,
I'm going to
he's
sit
not
here.
that cool.
Oh, come on. Brian sounds cool.
I'm gonna clip this and I'm gonna clip that out and send this to him.
Um, but he says it right here on page 194, 195. On the very top of 195, he's talking about by being in these spaces with these faceless people and floating around is that you have no roots. You're not anchored. You are not receiving any nourishment from these interactions versus finding your communities and building into this. And so I think that there is this sense of self-regulation and balance. You know, we're not going to sit here. We said this from the beginning. It's 2025. We're not going to say absolutely no technology ever. We're talking about how do we approach this both from the, educational and parental standpoint. And I think that this is helping kids understand that balance. And this is where I'm going to transition into the next piece because I love chapter 8 is this idea that part of that is kind of coming back and tapping into ourselves. And he's calling it spiritual elevation and degradation. And I have always in my head had a hard time articulating this because I do see the link between learning and spirituality. And to me, it's not about religion, but it's about being self-reflective, understanding where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, how you want to grow, how you want to show up in these spaces. And if we are unwilling to be self-reflective, which I do believe is a spiritual practice, then that limits our ability to grow and get better. And those things are linked in learning, but I do think they have been unlinked in education, if that makes any sense at all. And so, he takes us into this idea of, well, why, kind of what you were just saying, why are we allowing these things to fill up these holes? Well, because we're not attending to them and we're not cultivating them in a meaningful way. So that's sort of some big thoughts taking us into chapter 8.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think we do these pre-service teacher observations in our region. And when I write feedback or give feedback to the teachers, or especially when I'm writing a recommendation, the highest recommendation I can give to a teacher is that they are self-reflective. Because I think that's the most important skill of a teacher is receptive to feedback and self-reflective about their practice. Because that's the only way you grow. If you are unwilling or not confident enough to listen to what other people have to say about your stuff, then and that's hard. And I think we don't spend enough time with kids. We spend a ton of time talking to kids about why that's important, but I think fostering that skill, that's much, 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 much more difficult.
Well, and these are those soft skills that come in with like the social emotional learning that I think are difficult to make authentic, but are so necessary to the overall process. And I think that is where sometimes, I might save a little bit of this for the next episode, but it's a partnership and why we need to make sure we're fostering the trust and relationships between our schools and our communities because we need to all just trust that we have our young people's best interests in mind when it comes to, you know, teaching the whole child because nobody's going to say, oh, I only teach the ELA part of this kid or I only teach the math part of this kid. We know, and this is what we know is that no, you're teaching the whole child. And as a parent, I want my own kids' teachers to be teaching the whole child. And I know as a teacher, I couldn't separate the two. And so trusting that by helping them become self-reflective and identify areas they want to improve, how this is all wrapped up in that.
Okay, so I want to just touch on something that you said about like community and connecting that to schools. And I feel like that's kind of a theme that I've seen throughout the book um, that really resonated with me because the author talks a lot about like we're so um, restrictive in the physical world, but we're less restrictive in the digital world. And I kept thinking about like it takes a village, but as our lives become more complex and busy, I think it's hard to maintain those relationships and those connections. And I think like as a whole in society, different people are coming from different places on their comfort in other people parenting their children. And I think we touched on this a little bit, Debbie, in a previous episode. But I do think technology where we currently are is really the important part is for us to pause, to be reflective, as you were mentioning, Stefan, and think about, okay, this is forcing us to really highlight what are our values. Um, how are we intentionally having those conversations in all of these different spaces? And then, asking for that community or that village to help us because we know we don't know everything and we can't do everything for our students or individually as parents.
You know what my favorite part of this book is? Uh, page 212, number 6, find awe in nature. I just was not
Mm.
expecting him to be like, go outside. I guess that shouldn't super shock me, but I was not familiar as far as I remember with this section from Emerson, which is just beautiful. And the the assignment he gives his kids to just go walk around and like you can't
Mhm.
listen to anything, can't say anything. You know, I I finished I guess it was the next section this morning. But this part was still in my brain. And as my 6-year-old was getting ready for school, I was just like kind of watching him. And that kid is never quiet. I think this doesn't necessarily pertain to toddlers and early primary because their brains are just moving a mile a minute. But even like when we don't give him any distractions, that beautiful little fella just sings to himself and just talks at a mile a minute, and he just fills up every every second he has with some kind of noise, you know. And it made me reflect on our house. There are just no calm moments. There are no times where everyone's just kind of sitting and chilling. And when it does happen, the very rare occasion, Ann and I will look across the room at each other and go, like,
Mhm.
look. And it, us 2 or 3 minutes. And then something, like someone touches someone and then all breaks
Yes.
loose.
Yes.
But it may, and I think that's okay for where our family is at right now. But it does make me think about like as the kids get older and they're surrounded by more distractions and more noise and just in every sense of the word, like what are some ways that I can be modeling just being mindful and taking time away from that? Like Debbie, you mentioned you're going hiking with your dog this weekend. And like I'd love to be taking my kids hiking and out in the mountains that don't exist in Moses Lake, but we drive somewhere and go find them. And but like oh man, to that end, have you guys gone hiking? There's those clowns who carry speakers with them to listen to music as they
Oh,
hike.
don't get me started on radios in nature.
Oh
Just
my gosh, like you should be listening to the crunch of the dirt and the
yeah.
sound of the wind and just the
Yes.
stillness. That's why I go hiking, you know?
Yes. And
Mhm.
camping and going out
Yes.
on the water. Yes. Don't.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
One.
so just real quick, I don't want to go off your paint, but when I was reading, I sat on my deck and I appreciated hearing that nature.
I think I don't do a good job of giving myself that gift, and it's got me thinking about how do I protect that time for my kids as they get older?
Hmm. Yeah. I loved all of these numbers, and I really encourage people to go back and kind of hone in on the one or two, and maybe that can be sort of the discussion for this section. But I loved all of them. They all resonated with me on different levels. But I think what is worth mentioning here is how social media is the opposite of what these sort of um, whatever these phenomena are. You know what I mean? Where it's really talking about slowing down, being internal, being reflective. I love this slow to anger, quick to forgive, non-judgmental, right? Like there's all of these things, being outside, and how these systems are designed to do the opposite. And I
Yeah.
just think that that's the point I want to make. And as parents, and I did write on page 215, like what can we do about this in school? And this was kind of, again, this is a little, you have to be careful, but I think this awe of being in nature, how can we bring that in? One of my best professional learning, now granted, this was adult learning, but at the end of some very intensive packed days, they would send us out to be outside, no phones. We couldn't journal. They just wanted us to go and soak it in and not talk to anybody and kind of, have these sort of solitude and walks to help with the reflective piece. And I just think that there are some subtle ways that we can step up as educators and offer some of these opportunities. But I think, too, another point is he talks about how, we talk about this rise in anxiety, the rise in depression. And while we've said this before, while I think we all agree that it's hard to just pinpoint it to one thing, there's a lot of things happening that can all contribute to this. But I think what we see is that people are outside less, right? They are there is so much more distraction and there's so much competing for their attention, that this need to have stillness, have quiet, be outside, it's so easily filled. And I think that we need to kind of come back to, what can we do as parents and as educators? And I just think really absorbing and taking in some of the ideas from this chapter, and then thinking through, maybe not all of them, but what are some little shifts you can do both personally. Stefan, I love that you're thinking about like, what can I do to then model for my kids, and I think that the more you make space, I just think about your ripple, right? The more you make space for in your own life, the more it's naturally going to touch other people. And that's just, I'm just really glad that he included this chapter in this book. I thought it was a really nice way to end this part of the chunk of the book. I think what he's really trying to do here is talk about this kind of inner design that we all have, that we have lost connection to. And again, I wouldn't say because of social media. I would say because the world we're living in is moving us at a very fast-paced way, and in the society that we live in is rewarding very grindy work ethic. And so we are in a lot of ways rewarded for not taking the time to slow down and connect in whatever way that means for you, right? For some people, it is religion. For some people, it is other things. But I think that's really the point he's trying to make, is we are not fostering and nurturing this connection. And that's where I think there's some wisdom there.
Yeah, he doesn't focus on just one religion. And I think he does talk about various concepts through different like spiritual lenses. I guess it was just a little off-putting to me. And so what I kept thinking about is really like all of these topics, I kept coming back to like, how do we help ourselves and, our children and our students see each other's humanity? Like for me, that's kind of what it boiled down to. How do we help each other like see all of the uniqueness, the good, the benefit of relationships, and the sense of community and belonging? Like my teenage son, he's really gotten into fishing, and maybe that's not physical exercise necessarily, but I do think he appreciates like the stillness and the quiet, and it can be solo or it can be with others. He has some autonomy, but he's been taking some of his friends out now and like introducing them. And oh gosh, there was I'm sorry, at the risk of oversharing, it was just hilarious. So he took a couple boys that had spent the night. They went out fishing. I don't know. You could maybe cut this, but I don't know if it's good or bad parenting, but like we just let them go. Now they did not have a boat, but like we just let them be at the lake, and we were not imposing anything on them. And so when we pick them up, kids go home, his friends go home. He goes, Mom, I felt like a dad. And he's like, it's great that they all wanted to come fishing, but like one kid, he kept trying to tie his own line, but his lures kept falling off. So I had to do it for him. He goes, one kid kept getting his like fishing line stuck in the trees and the bushes. Another one was complaining because he couldn't catch fish, but he never had his line in the water. He's like, so I barely even got to fish. So like, I was dying at the end of that. But part of me is like, okay, there are so many great lessons that he's learning through all of these activities, but he's doing it through something that he loves.
I think that's the perfect place to wrap up, because what you're describing is almost an exact example from the last part of this book, like where the mom was having, or he like suggests like having like your kid running errands for you, and the kid comes to the realization of all this mundane, thankless stuff that the mom has been doing to keep the family running. And like that's exactly what your son just went through, is these are all the things my parents do for me that I don't even pay attention to, but he got a taste of that because he was now the responsible one for his parents. And I love that you said you think that was maybe bad parenting. I think that is exactly what this book is encouraging parents to do, Vanessa, is like you gave him the appropriate amount of freedom. And what did he have to do? He had to authentically step up to support his community, to leverage his expertise, to help his friends. That's emotional growth and maturity. So I just think that's maybe a perfect place for us to round out this section, because I think the conversation will naturally take us into the last part. So any final thoughts or final words before we wrap up?
No, just that I think we're all looking forward to the next section where we can finally talk about what we can do to solve this problem.
Perfect. Well, that will be next time. All right. We'll see you then. That's it for this episode of The Slow Scroll. These are messy and important conversations, and we're glad you're in them with us. If something sparked your thinking or unsettled it, we hope you'll sit with it, talk about it, and bring it into your work with kids. You can connect with us, ask questions, or provide feedback using the link to the feedback form in the show notes. Feel free to share the episode, send it to a colleague, or keep the dialogue going in your own circles. Just don't stop talking about what matters. Okay, we were having a conversation about Vanessa's story, about dropping her son and his friends off at the lake, and I asked Debbie and Vanessa, what is the youngest you would allow your son and his group of friends to go do this? And we have established that everybody in the group can swim and or are strong swimmers at whatever age you can say they can go. All right. And I didn't ask if you guys are okay with me recording this. Is it okay if I record
We also
this?
established that the outing is not a swimming outing, that the outing is to go fishing at the lake.
And I would add to that, as a former young man, little boy, Vanessa said that you said your son was almost 14. He's almost 14 when you said he could do this. If I'm at the lake with a group of my friends, the odds that one of us is going to try to push someone else in, even though we're not supposed to be in the lake, are non-zero. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the thought is definitely going to cross all of our minds. So just because it's not a swimming outing,
we're not there to fish because we're going to scare the fish away.
Yeah, there you go. What's knowing everything that could go wrong? What's the youngest you would allow?
I would say my oldest is 12 turning 13, and I feel like at some point this year he crossed over into a maturity that I would trust him.
Okay.
And his friends, like with his friends. I don't know that I'm thinking about my 9-year-olds and I would not feel comfortable letting them do something like that. What I'm trying to think about is as my oldest as a 9-year-old, because that's a little bit different than my current 9-year-olds. But no, I think with my oldest feeling okay with it is probably in this last year. So 12, almost 13.
So we first did this last summer. So they were 12 turning 13. But I want to put into context, like for us, it wasn't an age per se, but really thinking about him and his maturity level.
Mm.
And kind of, I guess, going back to the book. So there had been multiple things. So, like on social media, there had been talk of kids and self-harm. And so he had come to me with that in sixth grade, like voluntarily. It wasn't that I was checking his device. So I was like, I think that there is a certain level of maturity for them to come and be like, this is really upsetting and I don't think this is okay. And then when we moved to this really, really, really small town, um, gosh, I don't know what he was, 10 turning 11. Like after school, a lot of the kids would stay in town waiting for sports practice. And so he had asked me, can I stay with my friends? And I said, yes, but like you have to make good choices. And after that incident, like I drove to the field when I got off work, just kind of checked on him. And then my husband was doing the coaching part. And so he jumped in my car really quick and like his facial expression, I could tell there was something going on. And so he talked about kids shoplifting. So I guess I feel like there have been these moments where he's demonstrated his level of maturity and ability to handle these challenging, ambiguous situations. And I'm not saying that he or his friends at that age couldn't make poor decisions, but that was part of our decision process.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it depends on the kid, right? We say all the
Mm-hmm.
time, like the joke in our house is like, I'd trust, our youngest who's 2 to do that now, and I wouldn't trust our oldest who's 6, just maturity level depending on the task, attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think like you guys had gone fishing before, so I'm trying to like put myself in this
Mm-hmm.
scenario. Gone with them, probably at a place you can trust, a place where they're at. How far away were you?
Uh, it's like a 15-minute
Okay.
drive. But the lake is small, um, one road access, and then there's like a walking trail all the way around the lake.
And you knew the kids he was with, right? His buddies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So knew them, knew their families.
Mm-hmm. And like we had talked to all the parents,
Yeah.
If all of the parents weren't on board, then obviously that wouldn't happen.
And how long were they there?
Maybe about 2 hours.
Oh, okay. It's a good amount of time. And did they have a way to contact you in case something went wrong, like a phone
Yes.
or okay.
Yes.
All of those in play, I think I might go as low as like 10 or 11. Maybe not for 2 hours at a time, but and I think there would be a sliding scale of how long I would let them be there and how far away I was,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Maybe the first time it's like, yeah, you guys go down there, but I'm just staying in the car and I'm just over here and like you can run to get me if something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that kind of gradual release.
Yep.
I just think it's very interesting that a parent's like, you're gonna leave them there, and my response would be like, they're almost 14.
Yeah.
They're in about a year,
Yeah.
they're gonna be driving, or like learning to drive, give or take.
So her son is on the younger side of the friend group, so I think
Yeah.
that's part of it. And then I don't think he's been given as much autonomy, and maybe not, she doesn't feel as confident in his ability to like self-regulate.
Yeah.
So like all of those things I understand, but I think
Yeah.
that was what made it difficult for her to.
Makes perfect sense. Everybody's family dynamic is different. Everybody
Mhm.
approaches those situations differently. There are definitely some things that I'm sure I told you guys this when I was talking to our sped director. She asked us why we were still walking our oldest down to the bus stop because it is not far. And did I tell you guys this when she asked? Because the actual answer is because I want to, because I want to
Mhm.
walk with my kindergartner to the bus stop because he's
Mhm.
not going to want me to go with him every day, and these moments are precious. It's not because I don't trust him to get down there, though. I mean, he does kind of squirrel, but like we
Mhm.
can step out our front lawn on the road. I can see the bus stop. There's no reason he couldn't walk down there by himself other than I want to spend time with little fart. She said her daughters, when they were in kindergarten, would walk a mile to their bus stop. And I was like, what? Like in Moses Lake? She's like, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a mile away. She let them walk by themselves. Both of her girls when they were in kindergarten, they'd go, and they would in the winter they would wait for this like creek to freeze over. That way they could walk across the creek as like a shortcut. It would like cut their commute in like half or something, And would I trust my 6-year-old to walk a mile to the bus stop and get there on time? No. So much so that if the bus driver doesn't see us in the afternoon to pick him up, she doesn't like let him off the bus. She's like, she told us at the beginning of the year, if you're not here, I won't, as a reassurance, I won't let him off the bus. That hopefully will change next year. We'll tell a bus driver, he can make his way home as a first grader, but it's that kind of gradual release. But like even the differences between like our parenting decisions and our sped director's parenting decisions, just 20 years difference. She's like, why are you not just letting him walk? It's I've got attachment issues, but
yeah.